If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let us know. Where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. Your words matter, your presence matters, and your voice adds to the heart of this community. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell icon so you won't miss tomorrow's story, one that might just move you in a way you didn't expect. Every day brings a new chapter. We'll be right here, ready to share it with you. The Last Letter, a love that transcends time. Michael met Claire in the spring of 1967, beneath the shade of a giant oak tree on their college campus in Georgia. He was a junior majoring in history. She was studying to become a teacher. Their meeting wasn't dramatic, just a shared bench, a dropped book, and a nervous laugh. But something about it stuck. Within weeks, they were spending every spare moment together. Long walks after class, milkshakes at the corner diner, and study sessions that turned into late-night conversations about everything and nothing. They were young, but it didn't feel like a passing phase. It felt right, easy, like home. Begid de Tartin. The end of the summer, Michael had saved up enough for a modest ring. He proposed under that same oak tree, hands shaking, heart racing. Claire said yes before he even finished the question. But peace has a way of slipping through your fingers. Just a month after their engagement, Michael received his draft notice. Vietnam was calling, and he had no choice but to answer. Claire tried to stay strong, but the truth settled like a heavy weight in her chest. They had barely begun, and already the world was pulling them apart. Their goodbye was quiet. No big airport scene, no promises shouted into the wind. Just a hug that lasted too long and a whisper in her ear. "I'll come back to you." Michael was sent nearly 8,000 miles away. Letters became their lifeline. Every week, Claire would sit by the mailbox, hoping for another envelope covered in smudged ink and foreign postmarks. And every week she would write him back, pages filled with stories from home, school gossip, and dreams of the life they were still planning. He told her about the jungle heat, the friendships, the fear he didn't want to admit to anyone else. But mostly he told her about his love, how thoughts of her kept him grounded, how every day he pictured her smile, how he counted the days until he could hold her again. Those letters were more than words on paper. They were breath in the lungs of something fragile, something fighting to survive despite the distance and danger. They talked about the house they'd buy one day, the golden retriever they'd name Scout, the kids they'd raise with bedtime, stories and pancakes on Saturdays. It was all mapped out, in ink, in imagination, in hope. But war doesn't care about love stories, and while Claire held on to his every word, rereading each letter until the paper wore thin, neither of them could know what would come next, because one day the letters stopped, and what arrived instead was the one no one wants to read. The day the letters stopped, Claire didn't panic, not at first. Sometimes the mail got delayed. Sometimes the postmark came 2 weeks late. She told herself it was nothing, just a mix-up, just another long week. But then another week passed. Then another. She started checking the mailbox 3-4 times a day. She listened for the mail truck like it carried air she couldn't breathe without. Every knock at the door made her chest tighten. Still nothing, just silence. And that silence was louder than any explosion halfway across the world. Then, one morning it came. The envelope was different. No smudged handwriting, no foreign stamp, just her name typed neatly and a seal from the Department of the Army. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. She didn't open it right away. She couldn't. Some part of her already knew what it would say, but she still prayed, for a mistake, for a miracle, for anything but the truth. Inside was a single letter, not from the military, from Michael. He had written it days before his final mission, and entrusted it to a fellow soldier in case it ended like this. "Claire," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I'm so sorry, my love. I wanted more time, I wanted a lifetime." His words weren't rushed. They were careful, gentle, the kind of words a man writes when he knows they'll be his last. He told her how proud he was of her strength, of her heart. He told her not to stop living, to build the life they talked about, even if he couldn't be there for it. He said he'd loved her from the moment she dropped her book under that oak tree, and that love, it had never wavered. "I'll be with you," he wrote. "In the mornings you don't want to get out of bed, in the sunsets we never got to watch, in every student you teach, in every birthday candle you blow out. I'll be there. I'll be part of you." Claire didn't cry right away. She sat there, still as stone, the letter pressed to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her heart beating. Outside, the world carried on. Cars passed, birds sang. But inside her kitchen, time stood still. That letter became her lifeline, her goodbye, her proof. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was Michael's last breath, captured in words. His final gift to her. And as the sun set that evening, Claire finally read the letter again, this time out loud, her voice breaking on the edges of each word. He may not have come home, but somehow, through every line, every memory, every whispered promise, he was still holding on. After Michael's final letter, Claire didn't leave the house for 3 days. She sat by the window, the letter folded and unfolded so many times the edges began to tear. She read it again and again, as if some part of her believed that if she just looked hard enough, she might find a hidden message, something that would make him come back. But no second letter ever came. Just the silence and the ache. Her parents urged her to move back home. Friends sent cards, casseroles, and soft, pitiful glances. But Claire didn't want pity. She didn't want to heal or move on. What she wanted, what she needed, was something the world couldn't give her, him. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She went back to school. She showed up for her students. She taught math and science and sometimes paused in the middle of a lesson because her breath caught without warning. But she always continued because Michael had asked her to. She smiled when people needed her to smile, laughed when she could, and every night before bed she whispered, "Good night, love," to a man who wasn't there. People assumed she'd eventually meet someone new. She was young, kind, beautiful in a soft, unspoken way. But the years passed and no one ever seemed quite right. Not because she closed her heart, but because it was already full. Claire never stopped loving Michael. Not in a sad, clinging to the past kind of way. It was quieter than that, more woven into her being, like a thread stitched through every part of her life. She didn't wear black forever. She didn't sit in mourning. She lived, but she lived with him. When she bought her first home, she placed his photo by the fireplace. When she planted flowers in the backyard, she whispered stories to the wind, just in case he could hear them. And every birthday, she read his letter again. It aged just like she did. The ink faded, the paper yellowed, but the words never lost their weight. "Build the life we dreamed of," he'd written. So she did. She became the teacher every kid remembered. She adopted a rescue dog named Scout, the golden retriever they'd once joked about. She traveled, took photos, sent postcards to herself with little notes. Michael would have loved this. She lived a full life. But love never left her. It just changed form. Years later, when a young student asked her why she never married, she smiled and said, "I already met my forever," because the truth was simple. Michael may have died in a place far away, but her love for him never did. It stayed, in her voice, in her choices, in every quiet moment she faced alone with courage. Even without him by her side, she kept loving. And somehow, he never really left. The letter never left her nightstand. Decades passed, seasons changed, and the world spun forward, but that single piece of folded paper, weathered and yellowing, stayed right there beside Claire, night after night. Sometimes she didn't read it for years. Other times she'd unfold it in the quiet of a thunderstorm, when the rain reminded her of the nights she waited for Michael's letters to arrive. She knew every word by heart, but still, she read it like it was new. Like it was written just yesterday. It was more than a letter now, it was a companion, a witness, a vow that time never broke. Claire never remarried, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. Her life was full. She had friends who adored her, students who visited long after graduation, and a garden that bloomed brighter each year. But Michael was the root of it all. The letter was his voice. And his voice somehow never stopped speaking to her. When she turned 70, her niece Emily moved in to help around the house. Claire was slower now, sometimes forgetting where she left her glasses or how long the kettle had been boiling. But her memory of Michael, that never faded. One evening, Emily found the letter in the nightstand drawer. She unfolded it gently, her hands pausing over each line, as if she could feel the history soaked into the ink. She didn't read it aloud, not then. She simply held it and asked, "Aunt Claire, who wrote this?" Claire looked up from her rocking chair. Her eyes, soft with time, sparkled with something deeper than memory. "My husband," she said quietly. "He never made it home, but he made sure I never felt alone." Emily's breath caught. In that moment she realized this wasn't just a story about war or heartbreak or a young love that ended too soon. It was a story about continuation, about how one person's presence could live far beyond their final breath, carried through the choices of the one left behind. That night, Claire asked Emily to place the letter in a small wooden box, the one Michael had given her for her 24th birthday, the one she'd kept hidden in the back of her closet. Inside, she placed the letter, a photo of them under the old oak tree and a small pressed flower from the day he proposed. "When I'm gone," Claire whispered, "don't let this get buried. Let it be read. Let people know that real love doesn't vanish. It becomes part of who we are." Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. The letter, once meant to say goodbye, had become something else entirely. A testament, a legacy, a quiet, enduring reminder that some love stories don't end. They echo, even in silence, even in absence. Even after all the ink has faded, the letter lived on. After Claire passed, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but not empty. Not gone. Emily stayed for a few more weeks, sorting through drawers, boxing up memories, breathing in the last pieces of the woman who had taught her what grace looked like in real life. The small wooden box, the one Claire had handed to her just weeks before, sat unopened on the bedside table waiting. She didn't rush it. But one rainy afternoon, with the skies soft and grey like a memory, Emily opened it. Inside were the three treasures Claire had chosen: the faded letter from Michael, a black and white photo of them laughing under a giant oak tree, and a fragile pressed flower, its colour almost gone, but its shape still perfect. Emily held the letter in both hands, heart steady, and began to read aloud. This time the words weren't just for Claire. They were for everyone who had ever loved and lost, and loved still. Michael's voice, through his letter, came to life. Again, not just in the room but in Emily's heart. The way he spoke to Claire, the way he urged her to keep going, to build the life they dreamed of. It was timeless, honest, undeniably human. And that's when Emily knew this wasn't just a private memory. It was a message meant to be shared. Weeks later, Emily stood in front of a room filled with strangers and family. It was Claire's memorial, but it didn't feel like goodbye. Not really. With the letter in hand and her voice trembling slightly, she began to read. The room fell silent. Some people cried, others smiled through tears. A few just sat still, eyes closed, as if picturing the man who had never come home, and the woman who never stopped loving him. That day, something changed. The letter, once folded and tucked away in the dark, now belonged to everyone. It became more than a relic of the past. It became a lesson, a light, a reminder that true love doesn't belong to one era. It doesn't fade with time or die with distance. It lives in the choices we make, in the words we pass on, in the quiet faith that love, real love, can outlast the war, the waiting, even the final goodbye. Years later, Emily would tell her own children about Michael and Claire. Not as a tragedy, but as a story of courage and devotion, a story about choosing love even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. And in doing so, the letter kept living, in new hands, new hearts, new generations. Because love, when it's true, doesn't belong to the past. It becomes part of time itself, and somehow, it never lets go. If this story touched something deep within you, we would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever known a love that endured through distance, loss, or time? Maybe it was your grandparents, your parents, or maybe it was your own. Stories like Michael and Claire's remind us that love doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It can be quiet, steady, unshakable. So please, share in the comments where you're watching from and tell us what part of their story stayed with you the most. Was it the letter? The waiting? The strength of a woman who chose to live with love even after loss? We read every comment and we believe stories are meant to be shared, not just told. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss tomorrow's story. There's more love, more life, and more truth to uncover. One letter, one heart, and one story at a time. Let's keep this conversation going. You never know who might need it today.